So this is the picture that I did. So what you'll need is a picture printed out on just copy paper is fine. First step you need to know is you want to find out what composition, what part you want to draw. Okay, so for this one, I'm mostly going to do all of it for the picture, but sometimes you might want to crop it out, you know. So say, for example, if you were doing a portrait of yourself and you had somebody else over here that you didn't want to draw, say this is you, then what we could do is you crop it right here and over here, and then that way you're only gridding out the part that you want to draw, okay? First of all, what we need to know, though, is how big is our picture that we printed out. What we want to do is we want to measure the height and width. So what you'll want to do is the area that you're wanting to draw, which, like I said, it's only because I'm doing the whole entire surface because I want to include this tree with my drawing. So I'm putting the 0 mark where the color stops or starts, however you want to look at that. Okay, and then it's going to go all the way down over here to the other side, and you can see that it is perfectly 10 inches. Okay, now what we want to do is find out the height of it. So same thing, we want to put the 0 at the place where the color stops. And keep in mind too, you want to make sure that you're keeping your ruler straight. So for example, you don't want to have your ruler like this at an angle because that's not an accurate measurement, okay? So what I do is I look at the distance that I'm seeing here. Does it look like it's straight? Okay, so sometimes even a little bit off like that can still make a big difference in the measurements, okay? So try to get it, and you could even, if you wanted to line it up with the actual side, that way it's a perfectly straight line, you could do that. Okay, so again, at 0, looking over here, and it goes until it's just a little bit bigger than 6.5. Okay, it's 2 little tick marks after 6.5. So it's easier if you round these to whole numbers, just for the sake of, because here in a minute we're going to have to do some math, and unless you like decimals, it's a little easier to round it, okay? So then at this point is where I would say, okay, so if I wanted to round this to 6, that means I'm going to have to chop off some of my picture, okay? So then I would look at, well, what part can I chop off? Do I want to chop off 1/2 inch from the top or the bottom? So in deciding that, then I kind of look at it and look at my overall composition. What, say for example, if I chopped off 1/2 inch from the top, I'm just going to use this other ruler as an example, that's where it would cut it off at. So that would kind of cut off some of his ears, okay? So I'd rather not do that because that kind of isn't what I was going for. So then what I can do is I can flip it over and we can look at it like this. So for example, I'm putting it on the 6 so that I know that that's the 6. And then I can put this on the 0. So then I know that's the point of where it's going to chop it off. So then you have to ask yourself, are you happy with that composition? And I'm fine with that. So that's what I'll do. So in order to do that, what we need to do though is I'm going to start, since this is the side that I'm keeping and this is the side I'm going to end up chopping off, I'm going to start 0 over here. So again, putting your 0 on that line where the color stops, coming over here, keeping your ruler straight, I'm going to put a little tick mark here at the 6, okay? And again, it's the line that's directly above, on this ruler, it's the line that's directly above my number, okay? Now, what I'm going to need to do is I can't just do this and now just draw a straight line. I need to make sure that I go and I like to do usually 3, depending on how big your paper is, 3 to 4, maybe 5 even, little tick marks of where that 6 inches is, so that you can keep a straight line. Okay, so I'm going to do it about halfway here. I'm going to do another 6 tick mark, and then right here I'll do another one, and then finally here at the edge I'm going to do another one. Okay, if I put my ruler here and line those up, try to make sure they're all the same distance away from your ruler, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw a line that goes just like that. Okay, so now I know that everything below that line, I can even do this, so I know that that's not something I'm going to be drawing. Okay, so now this new line, this line here, essentially becomes the end of my paper. Okay, this is actually going to be 6 inches and this is 10 inches. Okay, Now, so that means our image is 6 by 10. So we need a piece of paper that's 6 by 10. Now we need to put a grid on this drawing. So I'm going to use a 1-inch grid. Okay, so what that means is I'm going to go through and put a tick mark at every 1 inch. Now you can use different measurements. You can use a 1/2 inch if it was something like a face, or maybe even for some of you guys, you might need to use a 1/2 inch for this wolf, because there's some features in the colors. If you're really wanting it to be super hyper realistic, you want it to be super accurate on where you're doing it. So you might want to do a 1/2 inch, but because I'm obviously a little bit more advanced, I'm going to go ahead and use a 1 inch. But if you're doing something that's a little bit looser, or a painting or something, it doesn't have to be super accurate, then you can use a larger grid system. So again, I'm going to put this at the edge of that, and then what I'm going to do is at every inch, I'm going to go through and I'm going to put a tick mark. So now make sure that you're keeping your lines good and straight when you're doing this, when doing it with care. Now, this is the important part. It's more important for when you have a picture that doesn't end in a whole number. And this is why I say it's easier, because students get confused with this a lot and end up messing it up because of this. What I say is, just to be in the good practice of it, is when you measure one side, drag your ruler straight down. So what a lot of students will like to do is they'll do that, and because it feels more comfortable, they'll turn their paper around this way and go here. Well, if this ended in a 1/2 over here, say for example, if there was a 1/2 mark right here, and they did that, and then they started out with 1 over here, well, guess what? Those don't line up. Then they would have a line that would get crooked. Does that make sense? So it's important to make sure that when you draw on one side, drag it straight down and do exactly the same, mirror it on either side. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got my ruler lined up with the line that I drew there, and also with the 0 over here and the 10 over here. And then I'm going to go through every inch. I'm going to make a little tick mark. On the picture, you don't necessarily have to do it very lightly. In fact, sometimes you have to do it really darkly depending on how dark your image is. But when we do it on our actual paper, we have to make sure to do it very lightly. But if you have a light image, it's not a bad practice to go ahead and practice your drawing lightly on them, so that you don't mess up your paper later on. Okay, so now we've got both sides of the 10 inches done. Now let's turn our paper and we're going to do the 6 inches. So same thing, line it up. And then at every inch, you're going to go through tick marks. And same thing, you want to drag it straight down and mirror it. Okay, so now I have tick marks at every inch all the way around. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to actually connect those dots. Okay, now what you want to do is line these up to the best of your abilities, making sure that they're the same distance from your ruler, and then draw your line. Okay, make sure that you're holding your ruler like I just was there. If you're only holding it at one place, when you get down here, sometimes that your ruler can move. So make sure you're holding it down and holding it firm so that it will not move on you. So I'm going to go through and connect all of these. Okay, so now I've got all of this gridded. So you can see that all of my squares are perfectly 1-inch squares. Okay, you don't see any lines that are crooked. That's something you want to go back through and make sure of before you move on, because if you have a janky line, then you need to make sure that you go through and fix that, because somehow you got off on your measurements if that's the case. Okay, but you can see that all of mine are straight, and all the squares are the same size. Okay, so now we need to do the same thing on our paper.